Dawn, can Corey come in?
We are live now. Chairman, we are live.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Members, you are now aware of the need to keep your video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep your microphone muted except when I invite you to speak. Please click the raised hand function if you wish to ask a question or pass a comment. Obviously, there's always a risk that we might run into technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do so. Should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is being addressed, and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such a time as it can be recovered. Can I remind members and officers that all virtual meetings will be recorded and that these recordings will be published on the Council's website. Members, I will begin by calling your names of all members of the committee to establish your presence. Please confirm by either raising your hand visually or in fact speaking. Let's do it speaking today. Councillor Peter Downs?
Here.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Ian Gardner?
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Anne Hay?
Present, Chairman.
Councillor David Jenkins? Hold fire, we'll try and pick him up later. Councillor Mike Shellings?
Wouldn't miss it for a pension, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mike. Councillor David Seaton?
Present. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Richard Robertson?
Present, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Mr. John Walker?
Present, Chair.
Mr. Matthew Pink? Hopefully pick up later. Mr. Lee Fanco?
Present, Chair.
And obviously myself, Councillor Terry Rogers. Dawn, do we have any apologies for absence?
The only apology we have is from Sarah Haywood. I understand Matthew Pink's trying to join the meeting, so he should be with us shortly.
Okay, thank you very much, Dawn. Members, do we have any declarations of interest? John, I presume your normal one?
Chairman, normal declaration, please.
And my normal one.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Any other declarations of interest?
Yes, Chairman. I just need to declare that I'm a governor of the Kimbolton School.
Thank you, Ian. Obviously, if we reach an agenda item where you feel you have an interest, please stop me and declare accordingly. This is my throat. I'd like to turn now to the agenda itself and agenda item 2, and those are the minutes held on the 8th of December and the action log following. As normal, I'd like to go through the minutes page by page. If you wish to pass comment, please interrupt and we'll discuss accordingly. Turning then to page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, 11, and page 12. Are there any comments or observations? I can't see any. Thank you very much. In that case, I'll sign them off as and when COVID virus allows me to. Excuse me, one moment. That's better. Turning now to the action log. That can be found on page 13. Page 13, we have 223 to 224. All seem to be completed. Can't see any hands. And turning over on page 14, again, 224 extension, that into is completed. No comments, thank you very much. Public questions. Today is a unique event in a way. I think we've had one before, but today we do have a public question, and that's from a Mr. Richard Potter. Mr. Potter, are you on board?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. I can see you now. It's quite difficult when you've got rare faces trying to pick out an individual. I do apologise. Mr. Potter, then you have 3 minutes to present your question. I think, Dawn, you will kindly time, but I'm not worried if we go slightly over. Thank you, Richard. If you'd like to go then, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I should probably say I'm a member of the Cambridge Green Party, but I'm talking as someone who lives on the planet, as I think probably most of us do. At the meeting back in June last year, I did ask a question about the extent to which the pension fund had investments in what I can call fossil fuel companies. And I actually have had a very quick look at the papers to this meeting, and I couldn't see what the answer was. That the written answer I was given did say there would be a deep dive analysis last summer and a review of this. So if there was any information on what was happening, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Much appreciated. I don't know whether members have any questions of you at this time.
Yes, Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Mike.
My question would be, has he got a handy definition of a fossil fuel company?
Sorry, how do you want me to answer? Just as the questions
just
come
just ask the question. That's all, Richard.
Yeah, well, Cambridge University, I know we have more than one university in Cambridge, but Cambridge University has published its strategy on this, as has I think it's the National, let me just double check, the National Employment Savings Trust, which is the largest sort of pension company in the UK, also has a strategy. But so I'm very happy to pass this on. But if I think you could take it as not investing in BP and Shell and companies like that.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Mike,
if I could have that information separately, Chairman, that would be very helpful.
I'm quite sure Richard would be more than happy to pass that on to you. You can either do that through Dawn or directly, Richard, if you so wish.
Yes.
In answer to your question, I'll now invite our senior officer to respond. Mark, I think you might have an answer for Richard's question, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the question, Mr. Potter. The question, we've prepared a response which we can provide in writing, but I'll read it out today. The question that was posed directly, which I've tried to answer, is as follows. Divesting from fossil fuel companies, on behalf of Cambridge Green Party, at the meeting on the 18th of June 2020, we urged action so that the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund joins other local authorities in divesting from fossil fuel companies. What action has been taken? So that's what I'm going to answer over the next couple of minutes. So since June 2020, fund officers and professional advisors have surveyed the responsible investment beliefs of the pension committee and the local pension board members, and from this developed a significantly enhanced responsible investment policy. This draft policy has been approved by the investment subcommittee and will be presented to the pensions committee for their consideration later during the exempt part of this meeting. Now, whilst I cannot preempt this later deliberation by the committee, I can say that it would be reasonable to expect the policy to contain a statement around support for the Paris Agreement, support for a just transition, recognition of the threats and opportunities presented by the green transition, as well as a significantly enhanced monitoring and reporting regime with regards to climate risk, such as through carbon reporting and scenario analysis. The revised policy will be subject to a consultation with stakeholders, including scheme members, once it's approved, and will be a document that is regularly updated over time. The fund's position on divestment recognises the fiduciary responsibility of the members of this committee. The pension committee members have a duty to act in the best interests of the pension scheme beneficiaries at all times, with a duty to act prudently, conscientiously, and with good faith in their decision making, not taking undue risks, and ultimately ensuring pensions can be paid when they fall due. The committee requires all of its investment managers to integrate both financial and non-financial factors, including environmental, social and governance issues in their decision making. This would include climate risks and, for example, the risk of fossil fuel companies being left with stranded assets. The revised responsible investment policy has been drafted on the basis of a general policy of engagement over divestment, whilst divestment of individual stocks clearly remains an option of last resort. But if I could just turn to divestment from fossil fuels specifically, I would like to point out 3 substantive points that are fed into the long-term development of this responsible investment policy. So number 1, the Minister for Pensions, Guy Opperman, concurred with a long-held belief of the committee that you achieve nothing in passing assets from responsible investment owners to owners without the same environmental concerns. On the 9th of March 2021, at a PLSA conference, he stated, "I oppose totally blanket divestment, and it seems to me that the way ahead is proper stewardship, and how you hold stocks that are influencing climate change is utterly key." It should also be remembered, of course, that the majority of the world's oil supply is under the control of state-owned companies, which cannot be influenced in the same manner as public companies. The second point, there's going to be a prolonged sunset for fossil fuels, even when achieving net zero by 2050. Whilst there will be, according to Lord Adair Turner, chair of the Energy Transitions Commission, a 95% reduction in thermal coal, an 80% reduction in oil, natural gas usage will reduce by just 50%, as it plays a significant role as part of a transition to a net zero economy. Immediate divestment from companies playing a key role in reaching net zero commitments may be self-defeating. And the third point is divestment may be at odds with the committee's belief in a just transition to a low carbon economy that ensures fair treatment for employees and communities that would otherwise bear the brunt of industrial change. And I've just got a few more moments. I'd also highlight the commitment to undertake annual monitoring of the fund's equity portfolio to calculate the carbon intensity of the holdings, as well as the potential emissions, such as fossil fuel reserves. The first iteration of this monitoring took place in 2020 and will form a key starting point on which future decarbonisation plans will be based and climate risk will be quantitatively managed. As I said, a written copy of this response will be provided after this meeting. The committee would welcome your response to the consultation once it's published, and officers will notify you once that consultation is live. That's it, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Richard, I hope that Mark's comments will go some way into addressing your question. All I would add to that is, over the past 2 years, our percentage holding in what I would call carbon-based investments has dropped from about 5% down to about 1.7. It did drop to 1.3 at one stage, but because of the increase in value of the fund, it's materially wise come up to 1.7. So we do look at this and we do appreciate your thoughts, but we are very careful on how we invest and we ensure our managers follow our directions accordingly. As Mark has said, you will receive the written response and that has to be with you within 10 days. If it's not, please let me know and I'll put a rush on it. But I hope that satisfies your question for today.
Chairman, we do have 2 questions from Councillors Robertson and Seaton.
Is that before or after the
I believe this is for the questioner or for Mark.
I think we'll discuss that in full meeting later in the meeting.
Sorry, Chair, I wanted to make a comment.
As far as I'm concerned, this agenda item is now closed. We'll come back when we're in confidential session.
Chairman, will I be getting a copy of that statement as it's produced?
you will certainly, every member and obviously the board will get a copy as well, because obviously as and when we've discussed our policy, I forget the agenda item now, I'll just flick up my thing now. Agenda item 12, I think it is. Once we've discussed that policy, obviously it will be circulated accordingly to the board and obviously to members if they so wish to have a copy.
Thank you, Terry.
Sorry, Chair. I really must ask if I could make a small comment, please.
Who's speaking?
I think we take our responsibilities very seriously, and I think we do need to respond a little bit more to this question.
I'm sorry, Richard. I'm chairman of this particular committee. I've made a decision, and we'll discuss this later in full session.
I will respect your response, but I don't think it's a fair way of dealing with the question.
Well, we have certain procedures, Richard, which we must adhere to, and unfortunately, that's the problem with the county council. We stick to the procedures and we do adhere to them. Mr. Potter, thank you very, very much for your question. By all means, you may continue to listen in if you so wish until we reach the confidential session. Other than that, I'd like now to turn to the next agenda item 4. Joe, I think that's you leading on this one.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, good morning, everybody. So this is the administration performance report for the last couple of months since the last meeting. I'll just run through a quick few points on the report. So item 2, the key performance indicators for the pension service, which can be found in Appendix 1. There are a couple of ambers on there and with the explanations detailed on the appendix. With regards to item 3, the receipt of employee and employer contributions, we have some good news. And the last 2 months in the reporting period, all employers paid their contributions on time. Hopefully that's going to go forward as well. So that's really good news. In section 4, we have breaches of the law, and we have the usual non-material breaches that we have to report here, which are caused by the legislation, which again, we are hoping will change over the course of time. We're just doing the right thing by reporting it as a non-material breach. Section 5 is the internal dispute resolution procedure. We have in this reporting period 4 cases to inform you about. The one I'll talk through in most detail will be the first one on the list, which is seeking reinstatement / compensation for LGPS benefits that were transferred to an overseas pension scheme in 2015. We received a dispute on this 4 years later in 2019, and it's been ongoing at stage 1 since then. That has been due to the amount of time it's taken to gather the information from the scheme member or their representatives, which happens to be a claims management company in this instance. It was a difficult and a new area for us and all funds in the LGPS. It's a growing area where members who have transferred their benefits out, either to overseas schemes or UK schemes, have not seen them perform as well as I'd hoped, or they have been proved to be scams or other such items in between that. So it's a bit of a groundswell on those across the UK. Unfortunately for this fund, Cambridgeshire, we've only had 1 such complaint on this nature. I know other funds are receiving many more and dealing with them also through the IDRP procedure. But after a year of gathering data and information on what action the member took and why and what our involvement was with that, we reached the decision with legal advice that we were not going to uphold the appeal. We don't know yet if that appeal is going to move through to the second stage, which will be determined by the monitoring officer. I can't imagine it won't go a little bit further, but we could expect to see a lot more of these cases going forward. Other than that, that's all I wanted to talk through, so happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions, members, please? David? Happy to receive.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Joe, for the report. As regards transferring out benefits,
David, would you turn your video off? If you turn your video off, you might get a better reception.
The number that schemes have seen. Let me try that again, Chair. Is that better?
That's better.
Is that better? Okay. Should it be in our risk log? Did you hear that, Joe?
Yes, it is. We have a scam item in our risk log, but I will check the risk register again just to make sure that that kind of item is detailed in terms of they're not always scams. So sometimes they are, members have made a decision that has later turned out to be not quite the case, but we have had, the LGPS and public sector pension schemes have seen on occasions that when it's gone to the pensions ombudsman, that the pensions ombudsman has ruled that the pension scheme concerned must reinstate them at full cost to the pension scheme. So yes, it is a risk, and we'll note that for the risk registers just to make sure that that's clear and prominent on there.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, David. Any further questions, members? David, your hand is up again. I don't know whether you want to ask a second one. Thank you. Okay, then I'll take the recommendation whereby the Pension Committee is asked to note the administration performance report. I don't see any hands raising objections to that, so that is accepted. Turn to agenda item number 5. That's the Pension Fund Annual Business Plan Update Report. Mark, I think you're leading on this.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I won't dwell too long on this particular report because obviously we have the brand new business plan and those activities which need to continue into next year are outlined in more detail in that. I would, I guess I would just pick up on, in particular, on the cyber resilience, cyber crime activity, where we did do some late work, following on actually from Councillor Shallin's comments which were in the midst of the last meeting, where obviously he raised concerns around this. We have done some benchmarking work and a questionnaire with with Aon. And we have started to some activity around an action plan around cyber resilience, as well as importantly a piece of work on understanding the data transfers that take place and the data being held with third parties. So we've commissioned that work and that will be being undertaken in the first quarter as a priority. So the things you'll be feeding into next year's business plan in particular are an action plan and some work around asset mapping. Aside from that, I'll leave it there and see if there's any questions, because I think some of the, as I say, the activities that you're probably most interested in will be in the new business plan as well.
Richard, you have a question?
Yes, I was interested to work. I mean, what sort of volume of data of the HMRC throwing at us? I mean, is it a very grave amount or a minor amount?
Are you talking in the context of the GMP reconciliation?
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Joe, do you want to come in on that one?
Sorry, Councillor, could you sort of explain your question again in terms of what you mean?
On page 26, it's talking about the file of data from the HMRC, and I just wondered how much volume of data that is and how onerous this task is.
The file of data will contain every scheme member that was in the scheme and contracted out of the state earnings related pension scheme between the period 6th of April 78 to the 5th of April 97. So it's a large chunk of the scheme membership. But that's not to say that the data is all wrong, because we did do some work in between, well, in the years in between since this project started to rectify the data. So it will just be a matter of seeing what we hold on our records now compared to what HMRC are saying and correcting that. So there will be further analysis as we move on, but effectively that's how big the file is, but that doesn't represent the amount of work we have to do.
Right, but you feel you will be able to achieve the new timetable?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Anne?
Yes, I have a question under 3.21 on key milestones. ITM Limited, under status, it says it's amber, data scheduled to be received in November 2020. I'm wondering if, that should have been updated.
I think, yeah, go on, Joe. Sorry, go on.
It sounds like it should be, yes, sorry.
So what actually is the situation at the moment?
So We have the
Is-
data.
Is it still amber?
In a sense, yes, because we have the data. We just haven't had the resources in the last 3 or 4 months to work on it due to staff absences.
Right, thank you.
I don't see any further hands up. I'll come back to my point that I raised in the chairman's pre-brief. In that, when we look at pages 38 and we look at the figures involved, it would be a little easier where we have blank lines just to put an annotation in there, and it'll make the following of the arithmetic a lot easier. But that's the only comment I've got to make with the members, so that it is in fact on record. Richard, you have another question?
Yeah, sorry, I've got several questions on this. On page 29, are these net figures we're talking about here of unprocessed leavers? I mean, are there new unprocessed leavers being added all the time, or is it always a reducing balance of people?
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons for the rationale of changing the way we're going to be reporting it to you going forward, which is in the new business plan, but I'll touch on it now as it relates to this. So the problem is these are gross figures, so the total amount, and the problem we have with reporting that is that there will always be unprocessed leavers. We can get a file of 1,000 coming in a single day, and that means that our numbers will go up by 1,000 on that day. And so what we will do, or what is proposed that we will do next year, is to draw a distinction by what we are calling a backlog and what we are calling business as usual. And we're saying if it's more than 6 months old, it's a backlog. If it's younger than 6 months from when it came in. So to be clear, if an employer notifies us late, it could relate to a leaver 6 months before that. But from the point we get it, we will call it business as usual if it's less than 6 months old. So yes, they are gross, and the reason the numbers haven't gone down, I think I've put a few things in there. I mean, yes, the pandemic has had an impact in that we were getting through the backlog quite well, and then our third-party support from Aon literally had to stop for a period of months because they couldn't operate at all. We had not quite that devastating an impact, but we did have issues of that ilk. But principally, we're slightly less efficient working remotely than we are in the office, it feels. But the other thing that's happened in tandem with this is I'm literally migrating all employers to monthly submission of information through the iConnect portal. And what that portal does is it does tend to generate more transactional activity, even though everything is automated. So it will know. So for example, sometimes if people change, their job is pretty much identical, but they change a job number on the system at an employer end, it will treat it as a leaver and a starter with us. And that's something we're having to work through with each employer to make the whole thing as efficient as possible. So in short, we're getting a lot more transactional activity playing into this as well. But yes, the new business plan changes the way we're looking at this, and we're trying to separate backlog, separate business as usual, and target both at the same time.
So the two reds on the next page are all to do with Aon and things outside our control, is what you're saying, is it?
Not necessarily. I mean, we because at the end of the day, us processing, us having enough resources to process even during a pandemic is down to us. There's an influencing factor in why they're red, but it's not gone as well as I'll own up. A lot of the business plan activities, I'm very pleased with the progress, even with the pandemic. With this particular one, I've been quite transparent that I'm not happy that it's not gone better than it has. But we're trying to do something about it by having a dedicated team on backlogs and changing the way we look at them, looking at the way the data comes into the office to try to make sure we only have to deal with genuine leavers and all the rest of the noise is taken out of the system. Those sorts of things. So it's bigger than just processing X number of cases.
Okay, thank you. And the last question on this item, sorry, on page 38, I think it is finance figures, yes, 38. Yeah. Looking at the accounts and variances. Where is it? Sorry, I just hate having to look at it on the screen all the time. I much prefer having a paper copy. Governance expenditure. Where is that? I had a question about what that is actually made up of. What do we spend on governance?
That page, top of page 39, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. It must be. Yes, sorry.
Yes. Yeah, governance includes consultancy costs as well for various, so across the board. So it's not just the governance team per se. It's governance associated expenditure, but part of that governance is consultancy costs, and so it's demand led in a sense, and it's sometimes hard to actually estimate, but we do the best we can based on what we expect in terms of major activities where we might need the support of various consultants like the investment consultant, the actuary, etc.
Could we have a breakdown of that budget?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
We can circulate that around, yes.
Thank you. That's all I had on this item.
Thank you, Richard. Mike?
Thank you, Chairman. I recall a number of occasions in this committee when the issue of non-availability of staff was key, and I remember some quite painful times when we were short of a number of officers. Yeah. I think it would be helpful going forward if we could have a regular report, just a short line, couple of lines, which says what's been our average availability of staff as against the budget for the previous 3 months or whatever.
Yes, I mean, we can. I mean, I would automatically flag if we had any major staffing problems, but I can assure you we're actually at, to all intents and purposes, full capacity. In fact, we've been slightly over budget during a year because I allow a vacancy factor within the budget in the expectation that I will have, let's say, up to 3 vacancies a year at any point in time. We're at full capacity bar we've got 1 person on long-term sick. Aside from that, we're as good as we could be, really. And in actual fact, I think the pandemic has actually helped in the sense that it has enabled us to retain staff through the pandemic.
Oh, well, that's very good news. It's just that it seems to me that would be a useful piece of information when assessing how competent and well whatever the process has been over the previous 3 months. And okay. I'm sure it'll always be good news, but I think it's a useful indicator.
Yes. Okay, we can provide that as part of our regular reporting, no problem at all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. If Dawn would make a note, thank you. I don't see any other hands raised, so I'd like to take the recommendation, and that is again to note the business plan update to the 31st of January. And then we'll put that to one side. And Mark, I think we'll go on to the business plan strategy.
Thank you. So yes, so the new annual business plan, medium-term strategy for the next 2 years, obviously with a concentration of activities on the next year, but identifying those further out where we're aware we need to do significant work. I mean, part 1 is of this. If I turn to directly to the actual strategy itself, part 1 is in a similar format to last year, where it goes through the structure of the service, what the objectives are, what the various business as usual teams do. And so remembering that the business plan activities are those which are over and above business as usual. But if something is coming down the line where we're going to treat it as a project or something in addition to BAU, then we tend to pull it out. I would on page 49, the structure. So when this was published, I was in the process of seeing whether I could agree to just slightly tweak the structure reporting into myself. Now I have got the green light from my new manager, who's the Section 151 of the Northamptonshire Fund. Just to enable us to deal with projects a bit better by having an extra direct report into myself. The cost, of course, to the Cambridgeshire Fund of that is half that body. So it is fairly immaterial compared, when you look at the finances overall. But I just would, just say to you that I'm looking to make that a formalised structure. I'm able to do that once the various we work out the service review programme within the Northamptonshire space following a unitary process. So I've got to wait in turn to do that, but I am putting it in place immediately on an acting up basis. So the structure is ever so slightly different from what you see on page 49. But when these were drafted, I hadn't actually agreed that. We'll obviously report that expenditure through the normal business plan update process. But if I work through to the actual activities, we have slightly simplified the way. So we've removed the those timelines with the various ticks this year because they were. We sometimes actually updated the activities, but not that. It's probably a bit more straightforward to look at and to report. You can see on page 57 the full list of all the activities. We have separated these out slightly differently, just again to hopefully add extra clarity to them. So we have procurement of services at the start. So we're just finalising the investment consultancy advisor procurement. So we're in a standstill period that we entered into on Monday. So I'm not able to confirm, formally the outcome of that, but as soon as we're able to, we will also let every member of the committee know the outcome of that procurement process. We're also in the midst of global custodian procurement at the moment, which will flow into next year. Looking further out, we've got a separate arrangements for actuarial benefits and governance consultancy. There is the ability to have an extension on those contracts. We're very happy with our suppliers there. We're looking at the extensions as to whether it would actually be best to procure all of them at the same time like we did last time, or actually stagger those procurements, and we'll also come to a sensible decision on that. And much longer term, the reprocurement of the software platform that we use. We have extended the contract as set out with your agreement. We extended that last year. If we do change software platform, we would need a year's notice in order to be able to undertake the work to do that. So we would have to start the procurement process 1.5 years in advance. So that is a major exercise, depending on the outcome. The B business continuity plan has filed over, so I will just turn to that one because I know that's one that was didn't move completely in the way we have originally envisaged, because I had to do a complete review at the very outset of the pandemic, and then we really need to look at our business continuity arrangements in the context of where we sit within the unitary, within Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire, and what they have in to support us corporately. So we're testing that resilience once we go live with that unitary programme. So you can see the timelines there on page 60. Cyber resilience I've already touched on. PASA accreditation, we deliberately reprofiled the timeline of that because we didn't see that as a priority during the pandemic, but it is something that we still have aspirations to subscribe to. GMP rectification we've already talked about. Of course, the one below that is McLeod. So we see this coming year as getting data in from scheme employers, updating our system with that data, and then the rectification itself will be the years after that, in line with every other fund. The valuation you're starting to see as the next activity because the results are published. The it's an April 22, sorry, valuation, or sorry, should I say March 22 valuation date, with results published in March 23. But of course, in the lead up to that, we have lots of work as officers and as a committee in order to agree assumptions, etc., that feed into that process. The undecided levers, I think we've talked about. I'm happy to take any further questions on that. The liability reduction exercises flows over from last year again. This is one that I am, as an officer, I am happy for this to go at the speed it needs to, in light of all the other higher profile activities that need to be undertaken. So it is something we want to do, but I will not do this at the expense of something which is more important. We have a certain amount of resources available after all. And then moving on to page 65, the multiple investment strategies. So Hyman's are working on the modelling that you agreed to, and you approved the expenditure for them to undertake at the previous committee. We're expecting that to come through any day now, but the consideration of that will be at the very beginning of next financial year. Employer covenant monitoring, we're beefing that up for certain types of scheme employer, so undertaking some quite detailed analysis. That's a specific activity that we brought out, which is obviously work, goes in tandem with the valuation. And then for investment related activities, you've understandably got the asset pool, which is still a major project, and we've got the whole illiquid piece to move through and complete, as well as some further work on the liquid assets. The RI policy, which we will hopefully be going out to consultation, following on obviously from your consideration later. The one particular area we really need to take a close look at this year in our local funding strategy is property. So the property strategy is something to look at, because the pooling solution is obviously some way down the line. And also for investments, that benchmarking piece that I'm sure all members of the investment subcommittee in particular are very keen for us to get right. So that's a major piece of work, and that's the last activity. I'm happy to take any questions on that or any of the financials within the report as well.
Thank you, Mark. A detailed report. Thank you. I don't see any hands up.
Hang on. I can't find the blooming key.
Richard, you got your hand up, so you can go first then.
Thank you. Page 54. Get some figures again.
Yes.
Taxes on income and losses on disposal investments and changes in market value. Forecast 686 million. It's quite a change from the budget.
Yes. So I think we're quite transparent about what we do on this. So in order to project it, we take the actuary's growth assumption and plug that in. If we then get any intelligence that things are going to be materially difficult, we then update it during the year. But as you can appreciate, that's incredibly difficult, because even when the markets dropped 20%, we had no idea where they would end up by the end of the year. So of all the lines on here, some we have great certainty. For example, things like the contributions, we broadly know what they are. Benefits payable tend to go up in a fairly sensible way. But the actual investment income and how the fund is going to move in terms of capital growth is very difficult to predict. And so sometimes we are completely out. But the actuary's long-term assumption seems to be a sensible way to assess it at the beginning of the year as to what it's likely to be.
That 686 is presumably mostly to do with market value, not with taxes.
Yeah, and so it says taxes on income, profit and loss and disposal of. Oh, sorry, I see what you mean. It's slipped down one, and it needs to be under profit and losses on disposal of investments.
Right. Okay. That is, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, the dashes are relating to the taxes on income.
Okay.
I gave that explanation. Hopefully the explanation was good for another question.
I've got another question on something else, but if Michael can go next, I'll just sort that
No,
one
carry
out.
on, Richard. Let's stay with you while you're there.
I've got to find it though.
All right, Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. One of Mark's very early statements was that this is on top of business as usual. I am always amazed at the volumes that the pension system has to deal with. And as there will be some new members of the committee shortly, I would have thought that at least at some stage it would be helpful and informative if we could have a statement as to what business as usual looks like in terms of volumes. Because I think it's huge.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we have. I mean, we obviously administer 2 funds. I mean, so across the entire piece, we deal with about 140, 150,000 members. We obviously have the potential for huge amounts of activity. If you think that every single active member and every single deferred member gets an annual benefit statement every year, every one of those could create a query. Even the activity for something like that can be significant. But I think that's an interesting point, and we can feed that into the training plan.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on that one, if I may, Mark? Bearing in mind, as far as I'm aware, we're going to lose at least 4 of the existing members. Should we not concentrate a little bit more on training for the initial 6 months of next year?
Joe, would you like to come in on the training plans? Because I know we've been doing some work on that.
Yes, it actually features in my next report.
Okay,
or does it? No, I don't think it does actually. So I'm thinking of another report. Yeah, we've got 2 training sessions in the diary. We haven't advertised yet because we don't know who to advertise them to, obviously. So the 4th and the 10th of June. The 4th of June being a date for which way around is this? Yeah, for all new members of the board and the committee for both Northamptonshire and Cambridgeshire to attend a training session on being a board member and a committee member about the running of the fund, the governance, administration and the management. And then on the 10th of June, we are starting the rollout of the new Sit for Skills and Knowledge framework, where our first core subject will be governance. So we are fully aware on both the Cambridgeshire and the Northamptonshire sides of both the LPB and the committee that we're running a big risk of having lots of new members that we need to get trained up. But we're going to do it in a strategic way, lining up with the decisions that need to be made so that we're not training in depth at the beginning, but not using that knowledge for another 2 years. So we're going to be very careful with it.
I found very useful, Joe, is the external training. In other words, the various presentations and meetings laid on by various firms within the city, and we can tune into now rather than having to visit. Is it worthwhile looking at what's on board over the next 6 months and try and feed some of them into the new members as well?
Oh yes, we will. Yes, so we're going to do a lot of the core subjects ourselves using our governance advisors, Aon, and any other specialist advisors that we have. But yes, we always keep an eye on external courses. It's just that we're not advertising them yet because ones that are out there, because we don't know who to advertise them to. We don't want to pay money for people that can't attend. So but yeah, hopefully the use of virtual meetings will still continue, because I know a lot of people find that a lot more convenient than travelling.
Thank you, Joe. Richard, have you found your question?
Yes, on page 56, the risk management. I wanted to draw attention to the third of the risks in the grid there, which is the fund believes climate risk has the potential to significantly alter the value of the fund's investments. Just drawing attention to it now because it's going to come up when we discuss our approach to responsible investment and the risks that we undertake.
Thank you. Yeah. Simon, please ask a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It was just to flag up that I've received one of the invitations that you referred to a risk transfer seminar next Tuesday, the 30th of March. And I was planning to go to that because as far as I know, and perhaps Joe can confirm this, many of these are in fact free. And so it seems a good opportunity to seize when you're offered these seminars, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman. So I'd appreciate Joe's thoughts on that.
I don't think I know about that particular one. Sometimes, well, a lot of the time, these seminars will be advertised directly to board members and committee members rather than through us. So, but if it's free and you're happy to attend, then please do. But we'll always advertise the ones that we think are important and let you know whether you should attend or not.
Yeah.
Would it be possible, Mr. Chairman, if I were to forward this to Dawn, and she could perhaps circulate that to board and committee members?
By all means, Simon, more than happy for you to do that. And I'm quite sure Dawn will appreciate the extra work.
Yeah. May I just come in, Chairman?
Yes, by all means, Mark.
I do. I mean, I personally, and I know others will as well, get invited to, Zoom calls, which are completely unrelated to a defined benefit scheme such as this. So, for example, you do get things like, buyouts and that related to the defined contribution space and personal pension. So you have to be very careful that what you are looking to attend is relevant to the LGPS or to a defined benefit scheme more broadly. So I would, if it's something which if you're absolutely sure that it is relevant, then and you want to go, then by all means it can be shared with colleagues. But if you are unsure, then I would just advise you to run it by ourselves first. And we that happens whether it's investment related or whether it's more general. But something like the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association, for example, will cover the whole market, and they will sometimes just send you everything that that applies to any area of the pensions market, and not just ourselves.
I'm happy to do that, Mr. Chairman. I'll forward this to Joe and or Mark, but it's from Hymans Robertson. They
should know, yeah,
and they should know. And
yeah.
Risk transfer does seem to be a reasonable topic to explore. But that was just my thought. But I'll leave you to have the final word, Mark and Dawn. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Simon. Much appreciated. I don't see any other hands on this particular agenda item. And the recommendation, the committee is asked to approve the attached business plan and medium-term strategy. I'll amend that slightly, Mark, because I understand page 49, you mentioned you were in fact making some small changes to that. So does that affect the recommendation or not?
I think we're obviously going to formalise some changes to the structure, and probably I'll highlight it through the update report. So I'm happy for you to approve it as it is, and then as and when it has an impact, we will bring that to the committee, if that's okay.
That's fine with me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Committee happy to approve? Can't see anything. Thank you very much, committee. Can I now turn to agenda item number 7, governance and compliance report, please? And I think that again is Joe.
Thank you, Chairman. Since I wrote this report probably about 6 weeks ago now, because that's the lead-in time for these meetings, a lot has changed. So I'll go through the items that have changed during the course of the last few weeks and give you the update on where we are with those. So firstly, the public sector exit cap, as you will be aware, either from reading a report or elsewhere, this was put in place with effect from the 4th of November 2020, but was revoked. The legislation was revoked on the 25th of February, with an announcement made on the 12th of February that it would be revoked. The reason for the revocation of the regulations was because Treasury became aware that there were some unintended consequences relating to them. Some may argue that we have presented those unintended consequences through the 5-year consultation period. So that comment has been made. Where we are now. Are
you telling me the Treasury didn't engage brain before speaking, Joe? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Read the Fifth Amendment.
Yeah. Oh, yes. So where we are now is we're in a fortunate position that we didn't process any redundancy retirement benefits during that period from November to February. So no members have had to have any arrears paid to them or their benefits adjusted as a result. That's not to say that's the case across the country, because some members of the LGPS were affected and were implicated by the cap, but there is an instruction to put those benefits right as though the legislation was never in place. But where we are now is Treasury are very keen to let us know that there will be a new version of the exit cap coming to us very soon in the form of a consultation. We don't know exactly when, probably the rumour is suggesting it may be summer, but the important thing is there will be a consultation, and of course we will be responding. So what we've had to consider here is really, we don't know how different it will be from the last cap, or so we just have nothing to work on as to how it might take form. So that will be interesting to see when it comes out. What is unfortunate is we'll probably have to repeat the whole processes that we've been through before to put the first version of the exit cap in place, or the communication with scheme members, the legal advice, the updates to our processes to make sure that they're compliant with the regulations, where it actually was quite difficult to be compliant with the regulations because of the differences of the LGPS regulations weren't updated at the same time as the exit cap regulations. So hopefully those problems won't appear with the second cap, but I can't promise that they were. So it's all gone a bit quiet since these announcements were made at the end of February. We haven't heard anything since, but no doubt it will appear fairly soon. And I can't imagine that the consultation period will be ever so long, because I think the government is still very keen to get this exit cap in place, in whichever form they then decide. So that's the latest on that. Should I perhaps pause there and ask if there's any questions on that particular subject?
Good idea, Joe. Any questions, members? Well, apparently not, Joe. So next one, which I...
Thank you. As the report says here, on item 3, activities of the Pensions Regulator, Pledge to Combat Pension Scams is a new initiative that the Pensions Regulator are rolling out and asking 6 pension schemes to sign up to this pledge, which involves making sure that you've got all the signposting, all the warnings in place with your websites and your communications, so that members have every opportunity to consider whether the action they're taking is in the best interest for them and prevent any further pension scams that may take place. It's also important for us to make sure that we are very aware of what a pension scam might look like. And we can't always stop a member from transferring out, and we're not, as officers of the fund, we're not financial advisors, we can't give advice, but so there's certain risk areas around there, but this is all about increasing awareness, and as a fund we've decided to sign up to this pledge. We have TPR is running a seminar next week to explain it in a bit more detail, and after that work will begin within the service to get everything ready to be able to fully sign up to the pledge as soon as possible thereafter. A further bit of good news on 3.2, the Governance Administration Survey from 2019, which feels a long time ago now. The results of this survey conducted by the Pensions Regulator were released in November 2020, and the details of which are in section 3.2.2 of this report. There's 6 key areas that the TPR expect public service pension schemes to have in place, and I'm pleased to say that we have all these 6 areas very well covered, and we have done for some time. So a piece of good news that we are a good scheme in that respect.
Well done.
Thank you. Next bit I'll move on to.
Joe, but you have got a 10% drop in the third one down.
Is that the risk one? Yeah. I think that's because they slightly changed the nature of the question that they asked. So people answered it less positively than they did in the year before. But that's not to say that applies to us. I believe we have a very good risk approach in place. I think that was more so looking at other public service pension schemes like the fire pension scheme, where that's a bit less well covered in that respect. That's administrated locally as well. So there are lots of different firefighter administration services going on. So section 5, again, 4, I didn't have any further comment on that, so happy to take any questions. 5, more updates here in terms of the Pension Regulator's new singular code of practice has now been issued as a consultation. It is enormous. It's about, I don't know, 300 pages long of what we have to read and respond to. As my personal opinion is that the new code of practice, which has combined what used to be 15 separate codes of practice into one, and public service pensions used to have their own code of practice, which was number 14. Everything is now in one. It's very cumbersome. It's very difficult to read. And unless you knew code of practice number 14 beforehand, I would not expect anybody who's new to pensions to be able to understand very quickly what is required of a public service pension scheme, with it all being mixed in with all the other types of pension schemes. So that's my key concern about it. Today and over the next few days, there's several seminars going on with regards to that code of practice for the LGPS to understand what it means for them. And we'll be responding to the consultation by the deadline, which I think is in May, 16th of May, possibly. But that will be a big piece of work in understanding what we need to change in order to be compliant with the code of practice. There'll be 12 months from the point it becomes live to adhere to that and make any changes that need to be made. So that will be a piece of work in itself. The other item here was the good governance review. That had been very quiet for a very long period of time. You may remember the presentation I did last March at Y Boston. Since then, the work has been going on in the background, and that has now moved on to a full set of recommendations that have been presented to MHCLG to consider and put in place statutory guidance on certain parts of that. Again, we're waiting for the MHCLG to comment on that, and then we'll know how we're moving forward. With regards to the SIT for Skills and Knowledge Framework, it's due to be released in April. We haven't seen any formal shape of it yet, even in draft. But I know our advisors, Aon, have, and they are building their session on the 10th of June for those that are or will be attending that around this new framework. But once we receive that, we'll be having a good read of that and seeing what we need to cover in that to also be compliant with that. So that is all I wanted to update in the report. There's a list of training events. Again, I have circulated an updated version of this to the members of the board who will be continuing their role without being subject to election. Again, this will be continually updated and sent around on a regular basis, just so that people can attend any courses that they feel, or seminars that they feel relevant to them, with a strong recommendation from us as to which one is relevant. But we will have a new training strategy in the new financial year, which will be clear on the expectations and what kind of training we need to put in place when we know about what our new committee and board membership looks like in terms of skills and existing skills and knowledge. So that's all from me, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jo. Very consolidated report. Thank you very much. And all these changes made in the last 5 weeks. Richard.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to take us to look at the Appendix 2, which is the training events. It's on page 87. As was raised earlier by Councillor Simon King, I think you were interested. We get inundated by invitations to join Zoom seminars and things on investments, mainly on investments within pensions. And I've raised this in the past that it's difficult to sort out the ones that are appropriate from the ones which are not. So I'm just wondering whether it would be a good idea just to perhaps to forward to the officers each time we get something like this to get some guidance on it, because as you say, you won't necessarily be getting these invitations, and we certainly do. I've accumulated probably 2 or 3 a week for the last 6 months. I think they're just growing all the time.
Yep, that's fine. I think we've always gone on record to say that. I think you might have raised it before as well. So yes, that is the approach we would encourage you to take. So anything you get that you are not sure of, or anything that you think is relevant or not relevant, please send it to us and we'll let you know. Obviously your time is precious, so we don't want you sitting through something that has no bearing on the LGPS.
Well, they often do have a bearing, but it's rather distant. So for instance, they're expecting us to bone up on specialist investments sometimes, which assuming that we have individually got the choice on what we invest in.
Yeah,
and that's just really
That is the problem. We do have investment advisors for that very purpose, so that you don't have to spend the time listening to all of this, and when we get what's relevant to us. So yeah, please do anything you get. We're happy to review and let you know.
Thank you, Richard. I'm not bragging, and I'm quite sure Ian will back me up, but I normally get 10 to 12 a day.
Yeah.
And if I forwarded everyone to Joe and Michelle, I wouldn't want to increase their workload. Yes, it's very difficult to decide what is best. What I normally do is find those that we normally attend or we normally deal with, and then I push them through to the officers and just delete the others, but that's my own personal.
Yeah,
Right, I haven't any further questions, Joe.
Sorry, I had one other on this table.
Yeah.
It's the question of the credits we get for each course that we attend or whatever. Has that been reviewed? Because I felt that some of them were understating the amount of work that was the benefit of the courses. So has that been reviewed, or have you stuck with the old system?
It's currently the old system, but we will be reviewing that from the new financial year. Probably will abandon the whole credit system in its entirety. If we're honest, I don't think it represents the greatest way. It's a broad spectrum of knowledge that we need people to have, rather than say 100 credits in investments. That wouldn't be enough. We need people to know about the broad range of their responsibilities, not just certain areas. So
thank you.
Fine. No other blue hands. Okay, recommendation. Please note the contents of the report. Are we all agreed? Thank you very much. Update to the funding strategy statement. Corey, I think I can see you're there. Yes, Corey, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to Councillor Rogers. Sorry that I don't have a camera today, everybody, but hopefully you'll be able to follow along anyway. Has everybody got electronic copies of the report? Is there anybody that's using a paper copy?
I've got a paper copy, but it was issued quite recently. Okay.
It's just because the changes in the strategy itself are highlighted, which may not appear in the printed copy if it's not in colour. So if you need me to guide you to where the changes are, then please just say so, and I'll let you know exactly where in the document they are. You'll probably be getting. Yeah, thank you. You'll probably get bored of seeing this paper. The funding strategy statement has come a number of times over the last year, which reflects the number of changes that the government have been making to the regulations. The latest changes follow on from the previous changes we made around the payment of exit credits to employers. As part of the same consultation that was put out by government, they were looking at introducing formal arrangements for managing the exit of employers from the fund, and also managing the risk of employers while they're in the fund. These are provisions that funds across the country have entered into with employers over the years. It's not being prohibited by the regulations, but there was no direct provision within the regulations to guide us on those kind of arrangements. So these amendments have fixed that position and give us a formal footing to try and be more flexible with employers where that's required. The first change is around the review of contribution rates for employers in between valuation sessions, and effectively allows flexibility for the fund to do so if the liabilities or the strength of covenant of the employer change. So we can choose to review the contributions in those scenarios, and it also allows for an employer to request a review of their contribution rates. So we have entered on page 15 of the strategy, which is page 108 of the pack. We have entered our policy there on when we will review contribution rates and under what circumstances. The second set of changes is around the exiting of employers, where they're unable to afford a lump sum payment if there is a deficit in their funding position. And it allows a flexibility for us to enter into two types of arrangement to spread the payments of that deficit over a period of time. So in the first scenario, this would be a crystallization of the deficit and spreading that fixed fee over a payment period that we agree with the employer. And we're able to agree a time frame that we feel is appropriate. The second arrangement has been given a formal name and referred to deferred debt agreements. And this allows the employer to continue in the fund as if they're an ongoing employer, but with no active members in the scheme. and they would continue to pay a secondary rate towards the deficit. And this would be assessed at each valuation cycle. And eventually the employer could choose to exit from the scheme completely, and we would have to treat them as an exiting employer at that point and revalue the deficit to see if there is any final payment that needs to be made. So the changes to the policy on page 118 of the pack, starting on 118 of the pack and going to page 122, those address those particular policies and say that if it is in the benefits of all parties, the fund will consider those flexibilities. It sets out the kind of arrangements that we might enter and specifies that it should be a lump sum payment in the first instance, and will only enter into these where that cannot be paid by the employer for affordability reasons, or because they need to use that money for their core business as such. It also sets out that we would require security as a default in those circumstances, unless the strength of covenant of the employer is strong enough to give us comfort that we don't need that security. And finally, it deals with the situations in which a deferred debt agreement would come to an end and sets out what those reasons would be and what happens in that instance. Conscious there's a lot covered there. Happy to take any questions on any parts of those policies.
Thank you, Corey. Right, Richard.
Yeah, sorry. Can we just remind us, all these changes, are they something that are being applied universally across this sort of our sort of fund, or are they ones that you've come up with yourselves?
So we have consulted with the fund's actuary when looking at these policies, so they are fairly uniform across the scheme, particularly the funds that they will advise will have a similar approach, but it does reflect our approach to flexibility with employers. So some funds may not be willing to be as flexible, or may have very prescribed circumstances that they'll look at it. They may have certain things they rule out. What we're saying is that we're willing to consider anything on the table and look at that on its own merits. We're not ruling anything out from the beginning, and we're not fettering ourselves to any particular decision.
Right, so, okay. On page 107, yes, now there's just these two categories you've got here, the councils and basically in academies, but there are loads of others, smaller organisations who we provide, who are involved with the funds. Do they not need another category, or are they covered within one of these?
So this does cover all employers. It's the two types that you just mentioned, actually, the councils and the academies, are actually the least likely types of employers to have these kind of arrangements, because they generally don't cease participation in the fund. So it does cover admitted bodies mainly, and also some designated bodies that might exit the fund as well. The clauses in the original version of the funding strategy statement around this did refer to just admitted bodies, but I asked the actuary to widen out that wording because I wanted to reflect that other employers do in fact cease from time to time as well, even though it's unlikely, and we would want to be able to put these arrangements in place for all employers if necessary.
If I may, Chairman, the table that Councillor Robertson's referring to is a deep dive on Note B, which is around stabilisation. So those are stabilised employers. On page 104, you see the full list of all different types and how we treat them. And then there's sort of reference notes, and the following sections are taking a deeper look at those.
Yes, that makes more sense. Sorry, yes, I misunderstood what was going on there. So thank you. Yes. One other question. No, I think that's a different item. No, it's all right. It's a different item. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I think we perhaps need to declare an interest at this point as the Chair of the Trustees of Cambridge Sports Hall Trust, which is one of the smaller employers in the scheme. I just like to say, I think, generally this looks very welcome. As the committee members will be aware, sort of fluctuations in contribution rates can often have a significant impact on smaller employers. And the flexibility that's suggested in the revised policy, to me, looks very welcome. The one question I would ask, is there a consultation process, particularly with those smaller employers as part of this process, or is the recommendation just that those changes are agreed today?
The recommendation that we put forward is that this is approved for consultation with the employers. The view would be to bring it back to the committee in June for final approval following that consultation.
That sounds like a very sensible approach to me.
Thank you, Lee. Mike?
Thank you, Chairman. Two questions. We're talking about employers or ex-employers who can't afford the exit payments. Do we have a sense of how many zillions of pounds we have at risk for this? And the second question is, what happens if the employer goes bankrupt?
I don't have any figures on the total risk exposure to the fund at the moment. We did do a look at this a number of years ago, and at that, I think it was around 2015, 2016 when we last looked at the most risky employers in terms of those that could exit with no guarantor behind them, so no way for us to collect money from somebody else. And the level of the risk exposure was actually immaterial to the fund in terms of the level compared to the overall liabilities of all the employers. So it's not something that is an overly burdensome risk to the fund.
It doesn't keep you awake at night.
No, that's correct. In terms of if they go bankrupt, that would be the reason for requesting security if we enter into these arrangements, so that we have got a fallback for that. But if an employer just becomes insolvent at the point of cessation, and that's their reason for becoming a ceased employer, then we just fall into the normal collection process for that. So any outstanding contributions from the current year, we would be at the top of the list for repayment for those. But in terms of the deficit, we fall in with all other creditors, and we just get a proportion of what that deficit would be if there is anything to be paid out at all.
So pre-COVID, and I recognise that that's a special case, the figures are immaterial.
Yes, yes.
Good. Thank you.
Well, when we last looked at it, we would need to do an updated look, if I'm honest with you, but these are very small employers that tend to have little liabilities in the fund compared to others.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Peter?
Mute.
Thank you. Yep. Are there any implications in all this for employees in what were LA maintained schools, which have recently become academies? I'm looking at it from the point of view of the employee here.
Yeah. None of these arrangements would have any impact at all on the benefits paid to the member. It's the contributions from the employer that are required for us to have the funding for those liabilities. But the pensions are guaranteed by the regulations, and the ultimate position, if all the employers had ceased in the fund and we didn't have any employers left to spread these payments across, then the admin authority would pick up any shortfall in the funding. That's the ultimate position. So the members are completely protected.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Richard?
Thank you, yes. Of course, since 2019 and the last time this was sort of reviewed from a financial point of view, we have the position that county councils and other councils with care responsibilities are not in the financial position they were in. And their financial stability is not what it was. So I assume, are we assuming that we will always be bailed out by the government? Because the fund would be in a desperate state if Cambridgeshire and, well, Northamptonshire has already been bailed out, I suppose. If Cambridgeshire went bust, then that would be slightly difficult, would it not?
It would. Mark may want to come in at some point on this particular question. The position as we understand it is the regulations provide that the administrative authority has to pick up any shortfall in overall funding if it can't be picked up amongst the rest of the employers. And it doesn't make the regulations don't make any express provision for the government to step in on the funding of the members' benefits. But our understanding is that, as you've seen in Northampton, if an administrative authority is dissolved, an alternative administrative authority would be set up and would take on all the assets and liabilities of the previous administrative authority. So from that point of view, there should always be somebody to stand behind those liabilities. But admittedly, in the regulations, it wasn't as prescribed that the government had to step in as was previously understood.
Right. Yes, I think that clarifies it a bit. I mean, at least we have the example of Northampton just to give us some less concern. Yeah. Thank you.
Mark, did you want to comment?
I mean, only to the extent that obviously the whole stabilisation model is predicated on the fact that a council is a tax raising body and can raise the required funds to do what it needs. If that was changed, then it would have a significant impact on contribution rates across the board. I mean, it would be, it does recognise those types of bodies as being there for the long term. In fact, they're always existing, and therefore we'll be able to pay their contributions to over generally a maximum time horizon of 20 years. Of course, that's something which we'll be bringing to the committee again as part of the next valuation process. Whether we have the same types of bodies stabilized, etc. So, and we will revisit that. We can obviously feed in what our thoughts are at that time. But I mean, let's not underestimate the impact that changing that would have, not just for this fund, for most funds.
Thank you, Mark. Right, I see no further hands, and bearing in mind the recommendation that we approve the amendments to the funding strategy statement for consultation with employers. So it's going to go further, and as Corey says, it'll be back with us later in the year. Everybody happy? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Corey. I think you're on again. Agenda item number 9, Michelle, effectiveness of the Pension Fund Committee.
Yes, thank you. So this is the effectiveness review of the committee. We usually undertake this on an annual basis, but due to the pandemic last year, obviously this was postponed, so we've picked it up again.
Sorry, Michelle, could I stop? You're very quiet. I can barely hear you. I don't know whether you can move a bit closer to the mic. It might help.
Right. Sorry, is that any better?
It is, thank you.
Okay, so yeah, effectively, it seems a good opportunity now to have a look at the effectiveness of the committee and to obviously gather your thoughts on the last 12 months to see if there's anything we can do to improve anything for you. So just as a bit of a recap, the survey consisted of 24 questions that were sent out to all committee members, and this survey was to be completed by the 12th of February. So we had a 60% return rate, and all of the detail, the full analysis of this survey can be found in Appendix 1, which is on page 147. So what we did was we looked at any areas that were of any concern to the committee. So anywhere there was more than one negative comment, we've picked up on to try and address to see if there's any further action we can take with those. So as you'll see under 4.2, the table there highlights 2 areas. The first one being about the virtual meetings that we've obviously been holding since the start of the pandemic, and how effective you feel they've been, and if there's anything we can do to change that or anything we can do to improve what we're dealing with at the moment. So on that one in particular, obviously we're bound by the legislation and we're waiting on further guidance to see whether virtual meetings will continue and for how long. But while we're in this situation, I guess it's thinking maybe more long term about the general view of the committee, about if things do change, what would be the preferences. And I'll open that obviously up in a moment to any further thoughts on that. The second one is really to do with about the paper copies, because obviously we've all gone into this virtual world of the meetings, and whether really we just wanted to gauge your opinion on whether you find using the technology adequate for the meetings or whether paper copies would be preferred. And obviously that was picked up as a concern there for paper copies. On that particular item, obviously we are bound by Cambridgeshire County Council and the way that they operate. What we will do after the meeting is just raise it as a concern. I assume it will be the official line coming back about, you know, not being able to print copies for us all, which is, you know, what their policy is on it. But I just thought, because it's been raised, just to let you know, we will formally raise it and just say it has come up as a concern. So they're the two things really highlighted. We'd be happy to have further comment from members today, either on those two particular items or anything else in the review that anybody would like to add further comment on. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Richard.
It's the paper copies. I was one of the people who said we needed them, and I've repeated it today. I don't see why the county council should decide on these matters. I mean, the pension fund itself should arrange for the printing and sending them to us. I don't see the problem.
A good point, Richard. I know we are basically, unfortunately, but our democratic services provide all the services that we need as a pension fund. We don't have our own, what I would call, individual officers for recording, producing, and the like. The county council's policy at the moment is no paper copies, but I'll come across that in a moment. Anne.
I also think the lack of paper copies can be a drawback. I mean, so I'm lucky enough in that I've got access to another computer. So I can have one computer with the papers on and one where I'm actually watching in the virtual meeting. But not everyone may have two computers, so it can be a drawback.
I agree with you there. And again, I think, Dawn, would you like to come in?
Yes, Chairman. It was just to say that the decision was taken by group leaders quite early on in the pandemic that there would be no paper copies, mainly because we don't have the staff in offices to print the copies. And I think really it's an issue to raise with group leaders. We're just following their guidelines.
Yeah, which I've already done. Ian?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I would agree wholeheartedly. I do think, especially something like pensions, we do need paper copies, and they do need to be in colour, certainly, whether you've got certain things need to be highlighted, so they should be printed in colour and all members should get it. And I do think we should be having, you know, actual meetings rather than virtual meetings as soon as that is possible.
Thank you, Ian. David?
Sorry, Joe, I'm going to go against what appears to be the consensus. I think if we're going to get worked up about fossil fuels, we need to get real about using huge amounts of paper as well. You know, you can switch between your Zoom meeting and the papers on one PC. You can do that, but we just need to stop using the amount of paper that we do as councils. Let's get rid about it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Mike.
The question is, Chairman, what is the benefit of using paper as opposed to multiple screens, which I certainly do not have? I want to add my voice to those who are saying that I believe it is important that to have informed discussions, we need to have paper, because you need to flick backwards and forwards and it is a nightmare. And if the officers are saying, well, we ain't in the offices where we've got big printers, then send it out to be printed commercially. And if the pension system needs to pay for that, then the pension system should pay for that.
Thank you, Mike. I mean, I will own up, as Mike probably knows as well, as a chairman, I couldn't work without a paper copy. As it's currently going, I, at the moment, have 3 computers and a paper copy. One, I obviously looking at the gallery and obviously looking at the questions. One for an agenda so that I know how I can follow up the agenda, and another one with a backup on the paper copy so I can flip between them. But I find that it would be very, very difficult for me and I'm very pleased that I do, in fact, have a paper copy, because it would be very difficult to chair these meetings without one. I know some other chairmen manage it, but they don't have 3 monthly meeting when you've got 200 plus pages every time. And obviously that as Mike says, it's difficult to correlate between various arguments when you can't flip from one page to another, and I find that very difficult on a machine. So I am an advocate of a paper copy, and I have made representation, as Dawn well knows. But at the moment, as it currently stands, the powers that be have not changed their mind. John, I see you've popped a hand up there.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm just adding my voice to what's already been said, really, about the importance of paper copies. I've only got the one computer, and I'm having to troll backwards between the agenda and the meeting. Now, this is a very minor complaint, but too often the officers refer to items we're in discussion with, and they don't mention the page numbers. And it's extremely difficult when you've got 200 pages on a computer to find the right particular point at which the discussion is taking place. So whilst we do remain virtually, I would request that the officers make a greater attempt to tell us what page they're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Point noted. I haven't gone in there. Can I raise the question of virtual or in attendance? I'll put it that way. Any thoughts on as and when? I think government, perhaps somebody would help me here. I've heard rumours that we will go back to normal after beginning of May, June time. Dawn, you're probably more up to date than I am. Would you like to tell us what latest thoughts of government are?
Yes, Chairman, the government's indicated at this stage that they're unlikely to extend the legislation past May. So unless anything changes, we will be back to physical meetings from then. But I think it's a case of watch this space, because there have been a lot of changes.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of opposition saying that some meetings could be held virtually and people would benefit from that. And obviously costs apply as well. Richard, I see you've got a hand up.
Yeah, so on that issue, I gather that the government are being bloody minded about it, to put it frankly, because they are clearly going to continue to run the House of Commons, etc., with a virtual system. They're not allowing anybody else to.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's going to court. Apparently, there are some legal processes in mind to deal with it, because we can't have us having to be forced into meetings which are not particularly COVID safe. When the alternative exists and has been working reasonably well. For the long term, I would suggest, yes, our meetings probably should be face-to-face. Training, no, I think training, probably quite a lot of that can be done online.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Peter? Muted.
Yes, I think on balance, it would be better to retain virtual meetings, not only because of there's a lot of convenience attached to virtual meetings, and we're also saving a great deal in travel expenses and in fossil fuel, in the burning, in the pollution of our cars. Just look at this gallery now, and suppose we all had to drive to Alconbury Weald from different parts of the county. That would have cost a great deal. And I think that if we can have paper copies, but a virtual meeting, that would be the ideal combination. And I want to know why it's got to be the government that legislates on that and not the local authority.
I'll ask government on that one, Peter.
Yes, do. Tell them what I said, and I'm sure they'll
I will. They'll stand to attention.
They will. I hope so.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, let's get. So we've voiced our opinions. I think most of us are in favour of paper. I take John's point of view on the other side, but sorry, David's point of view on that. And as regards virtual, well, we just have to see whether it's enforced on us, whether we're back to the public sessions in the formal meeting in County Hall, wherever we are. What about the rest of the training package and the comments raised Anybody, any points on those particular issues? John?
Yeah, all I would say is I think the virtual training does save a great deal of expense. And I found the virtual training to be very useful. I'd like somebody to express why face-to-face training is better than virtual training.
I see nobody volunteering to answer that question.
No, I think I would agree with that statement as well. I think on the training element, I think we've seen a lot more participation in training over the last 12 months, it being virtually. And I think it is fit for purpose in most instances on the training side, opposed to the meeting side, I would agree.
Simon, from a board's point of view, you've been very quiet. What do you think about training and virtual training? Any thoughts from your team?
Well, we haven't discussed it as a board, but certainly my personal view is that virtual training is far superior to in-person training. And for all the reasons that have been said, it's a lot easier and it saves a lot of time, and it's much kinder to the environment. So I think the training argument is really straightforward. I think that the argument about virtual meetings is much more finely balanced, and we've talked about some of the, or you have talked about some of the problems that there are with the pension committee, and I would share those concerns from a board point of view. But there are two other board members present today. I don't know what their views are. They might be different, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Dennis, Val, anything you'd like to raise?
Chairman, thank you. I like the idea of virtual training. It allows us to bring experts from wherever they are, save us money and save us time. As to meetings, I must say I would go for a hybrid, some face-to-face, because some things only really work well face-to-face, but also actually run as many as we can virtually.
Okay. Val, are you ready?
Yeah. I agree with Dennis about the training side of things. I found what training I've had to date has been really good, and it's been really easy to understand online. As far as the board meetings are concerned, I actually support like a hybrid. Maybe we have something like a virtual during the winter and meet up maybe in the summer months. The reason I would like to have some meetings is that I don't know people very well yet, and it would be nice to actually meet them face to face.
Yep, I think you're fine. I think I'm in for a hybrid as well. Joe, you'd like to come in?
Thank you. Yeah, we are planning to do all training when we are hosting it remotely, because we want to work with the Northamptonshire Pension Fund. So, and of course, there are lots of people in the Northamptonshire Fund, not least myself and Michelle, that come from the west of Northamptonshire. So travelling into Cambridge is actually quite a hike. So yeah, going forward, all the training that we host and have control over will be virtual where it's appropriate, which I think will be in most instances. So, but we just can't control what the external events choose to do.
Thanks, Joe. Ian, final comment.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, my final comment with regard to training. Yes, I see virtual training ideal and what have you, but my only concern is when you've got a totally new or virtually totally new committee, the committee don't know each other. And I do think when you have those training sessions, if they are in person, then it is an opportunity whereby members can get to know other members. Whereas if we're having everything online, it is very difficult to get to know your the other members on the actual committee. So that is my main concern, is that if we continue with virtual meetings for everything, we do not get that interaction as well of the members.
Yeah, good point. It's a conundrum, I think, that we'll leave with the next chairman of the two committees and Mark, I think, to see what happens and what develops from that. Okay, I'd like to bring this one agenda item to a halt. And notes the feedback and approves the plan of action to improve the effectiveness of the Pension Fund Committee. Are we all agreed? Thank you very much. Pushing on then, I think we're back with Corrie and admissions and cessation report, please, Corrie.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This report is just for the committee to note today. There are no decisions to be made. The four employers that are joining the fund, there's no discretion for the committee over whether or not they can join. 3 of them are contractors, and therefore if they sign up to the terms of the admission agreement, which they have, we have to permit entry to the scheme. And the 4th body is the subsidiary of an academy trust, which has been set up to run Sawtry Leisure Centre. It's therefore classed as a designating body and has the automatic right to designate people as being eligible to join the scheme. So again, the fund has no discretion over that point. The only thing to add to that on the admissions is there was one body who owed backdated contributions when they came into the scheme. Those have now been paid in full. So all the joining employers are paid up to date at the moment. The report also details 7 bodies who have ceased in the fund. For 6 of those, they were participating on pass-through agreements. So the risk stayed with the letting authority, the scheme employer that the members came from. So the liabilities are covered by them. There was no exit payments needed to be collected. But I would like to draw your attention to the cessation of ADEC, which was a charity in the fund. That actually had a funding surplus of £14,000 at the point it ceased. As it is an unattached employer with nobody standing above it and nobody guaranteeing it, we have paid that surplus out to that body as required by the legislation. I'd just like to note on that point that in terms of contractors in the fund that exit, we are not undertaking that kind of activity at the moment in terms of looking at surpluses while we await the outcome of a judicial review affecting the regulations that govern that relationship. So where they have a relationship with another employer and there are risk sharing arrangements between them, we're not looking at those at the moment. I just wanted to make that clear. I don't have anything else to add to the report. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Corrie. Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. I take the view that volume is directly proportional to work involved. So I was relieved that this report, unlike many predecessors, reduces the number of employers we have in the scheme. I think, again, as part of my theme for today, that it would be very helpful if the officers could draw to our attention the net increase or decrease over a year, at least on an annual basis, so that it helps quantify the struggle that they have to get the work done. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mike. Peter?
Yes, just on a point of information, could you just advise me on what happens to people who were employed by one of those companies when the company ceases to be in the fund? What happens to them?
That would depend on the ongoing arrangements for the particular service that was being provided. So if that's an ongoing function that the original scheme employer has to continue ensuring is carried out, then those employees would either go back to that scheme employer if they took that service back in-house. If they send it to a new contractor, then in most cases, those staff members are tupied to the new contractor. In the rare occasion where that doesn't happen, then they would become deferred members if they weren't being tupied either back to the scheme employer or to a new contractor. So they would leave the fund at that point.
But they would be protected as individuals. I mean, I declare the interest. I'm thinking of Chartwells, who were employed by the Aces Academies Trust, i.e. Hingingbrook School, and no longer are. but I know obviously a number of people who work for Charterhouse.
Yes, so in that case, I believe the staff did transfer to a new contractor in that situation, because school catering is something that does need to continue. So it's normally passed on to somebody else. I don't know the name of the new contractor for that specific contract, I'm afraid.
Yep.
No further questions. I'd like to go to the recommendations, please. There are 3 recommendations. Number 1 is note the admission of the following admitted bodies. There's 3 in total. Note the admission of designated body, 1 in total, and note the cessation of a number of bodies, 6 in total. Are we happy to endorse that recommendation? No comments there. Thank you very much. Dawn, how are we doing for timing?
I think we're okay. Just to flag up to members and officers, we do have an issue with the license for this meeting. So ideally, we need to finish by about 12:30. We have got two confidential items. So just to make that point, if we did need to go on much past 12:30, we'll have to send out a separate invite and just have a quick break and get you back in.
Thank you for that. I thought it's worthwhile the members knowing. Agenda item 11 now, as Dawn has already indicated, we've got 2 confidential items now, and for this we have to exclude the press and the public. I have to read this, unfortunately. The final 2 items on the agenda are exempt from publication, so the committee will need to decide whether to exclude the public and press from consideration of this report, on the grounds that the report contains exempt information under paragraph 3 of part 1 of the Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. Members, may I ask, is there general consensus in support of the recommendation? If so, the committee will take it now, or if anyone disagrees, please use the raise hand function. I don't see any objections. Thank you. Then the